There was this one moment that always sticks with me. A very close friend of mine, she said, let me just give you a little bit of advice. When people say, oftentimes when it comes to starting a family or having a kid, it's a miracle. She's like, it actually is. She's like, you wouldn't think it with all the people in the world and all the people you see with children and all the stories you hear about a one-night stand or somebody, was successful in their first try. But she's like, that's not always the case for everybody.
That's some extremely solid advice from a close friend of today's guest, Brian Tucker. A woman in her mid-20s will have about a 25 to 30% chance of getting pregnant each month. This is a number that's significantly lower than many think, and that's in her mid-20s with good timing and if there were no problems.
But I started to think, around like month 2 or 3, well, what if there is a problem?
Today, we're going to talk about the answer to that question. We're also going to talk about male infertility and the importance of support for these issues in the modern workplace. I'm Dan Bulger with Progyny, and this is Infertility. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As always, if you're listening on the podcast, please leave us a rating and review. Those are extremely helpful. And if you're watching on YouTube, please take a second to subscribe and like this video. For today's episode, we sat down with Brian Tucker, who is an HR professional focusing on healthcare. He's also a gifted public speaker, and we'll spend some time talking about how he's using that gift to truly make a difference for people who need support through their family-building journeys. And he knew he needed to use his voice to offer this kind of support after experiencing his own struggle to have a baby with his wife, Jenny.
Jenny even had in mind, sort of the perfect number of children, et cetera. Like she wanted to have a family of 3 children and the 2 of us, and maybe multiple pets at some point, but really it was 3 children was the focus. So it was, something we had always planned on as our relationship continued to grow. We wanted to take care of some things that were going on in our lives. I had some consumer debt, like some credit card debt and things. I said, what, I want that to be completely paid off. I want it just to be our student loans and our mortgage before we start a family. I want to save a certain amount of money just so that we feel we're in a, nice cushion financially, so we don't find ourselves when we start a family having this extra stress because we already have these financial difficulties. So we made that commitment and we took care of what we needed to do and got ourselves in a great position financially, and then said, okay, let's do this. It's time to start, a family.
And it was around this time that he got the advice that we featured at the beginning of this episode.
There was this one moment that always sticks with me. A very close friend of mine, I was talking to his wife and she said, hey, he mentioned to me that you guys are ready to start a family, and I think that's really exciting. I think you'll both be amazing parents. She said, let me just give you a little bit of advice. She said, I know you pretty well, and you're like somebody who just goes after it. If you want something, you go after it with everything. But I also know that you love to find out everything you can about a subject. So you like to go down the rabbit hole, you like to research and know everything you can know. Before you do this, I just want you to go into it with the right mindset. And that mindset is that, when people say, oftentimes when it comes to starting a family or having a kid, it's a miracle. She's like, it actually is. She's like, you wouldn't think it with all the people in the world and all the people you see with children and all the stories you hear about a one-night stand or somebody, was successful in their first try. But she's like, that's not always the case for everybody. And so I want you to go into it with that mindset. And again, I know you're going to research like crazy. You'll find out really what the statistics are to be successful with having a family. And I kind of blew it off and was like, yeah, it's going to take us a few months. This is me and Jenny. We're always the type of people who try to go after whatever. Some people would consider us overachievers. A few months, not going to have any problems. But that sort of sat in the back of my head for a little while. And then, as we were a few months in and it wasn't happening as quickly as we thought it was going to happen, that's when that conversation sort of really resurfaced in the front. And I was just like, hey, I remember this conversation with this person. I started to do some research and find that even if everything was quote unquote great and perfect, you're talking about 28% chance on the best day of ovulation and everything. And I was like, whoa, if you told me about anything in life and told me I had about a 1 in 4 chance of success, I probably wouldn't even try it, because I'm like, I'd rather focus my energy on something I could be successful at. This is, such a crapshoot if you really think about it. And that's in case there's no problems. But I started to think, around month 2 or 3, well, what if there is a problem?
This is where Brian stood out to us as a serious planner. He was a couple months into trying to conceive, a bit early really to get too worried about it, and he was already starting to save money in case they might need treatment down the road.
The only thing that we can really control from a preparation standpoint is the financials. So how about we just start saving a bunch of money just in case?
Brian would go on to share that they didn't seek help until about a year, even though at 6 months or so, he was certainly ready to dive into a fertility appointment. And I just want to take a moment to be clear. The rule of thumb is for those under 35 to try for a year, for those 35 and older to seek help after 6 months. But in speaking with literally hundreds of fertility doctors over the years, I can tell you that you don't need to wait for those benchmarks. It's possible that trying a few more months could work, but it's also possible that there's something preventing pregnancy, and that intervention would be needed, no matter how long you try on your own. So, if you feel like you're ready to see a doctor for an initial evaluation and fertility workup, we really do implore you not to let the rule of thumb get in the way. So, about a year of trying later, Brian and Jenny found themselves at a fertility clinic.
They did some initial testing, and then we ended up with 2 doctors. So one doctor was focused on me, and one doctor was focused on Jenny, and both of them had, made some suggestions on different things we could do initially. But initially it was like, let's take a look at this. This is, I think the term they might have used was general infertility, which really doesn't tell you anything. But they were pretty confident that this was male-driven. So the opportunity for improvement existed with me. But also we were going to look at some other opportunities like IUI. And if that was not successful, then maybe looking at IVF long-term.
All right, so it was looking like there might be some male factor infertility involved here. And Brian mentioned the 2 doctors. That's got to be a reproductive endocrinologist and a reproductive urologist. And now you might wonder, if the issue ends up being male infertility, perhaps we only need the male fertility specialist, a reproductive urologist. Well, usually it takes a team. And to help illustrate that, we're bringing in 2 experts, one a reproductive urologist and the other a reproductive endocrinologist.
My name is Dr. Tolulope Bakare. I'm the regional medical director for Posterity Health in Dallas, Texas, and I'm a reproductive urologist.
My name is Dr. Ron Feinberg. I am the IVF Medical Director and Chief Medical Officer for RADfertility, a proud member of the CCRM IVF network.
Over the past few years, reproductive urologists have taken on a far more proactive role in fertility treatment when a male is involved. This makes a ton of sense.
Historically, the woman has been really scrutinized heavily for reproductive issues. Many couples go a year or 2 without ever having the man be evaluated while focusing entirely on the evaluation of their partner. Fortunately, this is changing, and we're really starting to see men approach their reproductive urologist first for evaluation. Really, once you decide you want to start trying, and once you go through that 1 year of unable to conceive that's recommended, the couple should really be evaluated at the same time.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear here. This isn't some antagonistic relationship where reproductive endocrinologists don't want to lose patients to reproductive urologists. They actually work hand in hand.
If a gentleman has a sperm count that we don't think is optimal, one could make a good argument that the male partner should be referred to a reproductive urologist for a full evaluation. So we don't examine men or look for things like varicoceles or other potential abnormalities in the scrotum. And we do take some basic history, but we think our colleagues in the reproductive urology world are better suited. There could be a threshold where we think an intrauterine insemination is reasonable, but it might be more reasonable if the male partner is evaluated by an expert, and therefore maybe that would improve the chances of either spontaneous conception or maybe IUI at that point.
So it usually works out that a couple starts with an RE, and if there's an issue with the sperm, the doctor might refer out to an RU for a proper evaluation.
There are some basic parameters that we look at. I tell my patients it's a bit of a spot check. When we do a semen analysis, it doesn't necessarily prove level of fertility in the male, but you can get a general idea based on that snapshot as to the status of the sperm count and the movement of the sperm and something that's called morphology, which has to do with the anatomy of the sperm.
See, an RE could move ahead with an IUI or an IVF without consulting an RU if there is sperm present. But why would they? If there's a chance that an RU can evaluate a male patient and in that evaluation find treatment that can improve the sperm, this could improve success rates with IUI and IVF, and in some instances, it might even result in these procedures not being needed at all. And of course, there might be instances where the evaluation reveals that even IVF wouldn't be possible without an RU's intervention.
I mean, there's many times that, we recommend to patients to proceed with IUI or IVF, or, based on what the conversation with their reproductive endocrinologist is. There are times that, unfortunately, we are not able to actually get sperm in their ejaculate for many reasons, including genetic reasons or developmental reasons, whatever happened that is not allowing that patient to have sperm in their ejaculate. However, we can still do certain procedures that can help us retrieve sperm either from their epididymis, which is a part of the reproductive system that is in the scrotum, or from their testicle by getting sperm directly from the testicle that they can then use in assisted reproductive techniques like IVF.
And we're going to get back into Brian's experience in just a moment, but this brings us to an important treatment option for those with male factor who end up needing IVF. And this is a treatment that would be performed by an embryologist under the care of a reproductive endocrinologist. And that procedure is ICSI.
So ICSI stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ICSI. It is a part of in vitro fertilization and IVF, but it involves a more proactive fertilization attempt of the egg. So it's a micro-injection procedure where under very careful technique, our embryologists would draw up single sperm into a very tiny pipette, which is carefully injected into the cytoplasm. It's a very commonly used technique.
Okay, so that's the tip of the iceberg, really, on how REs and RUs work together for their patients. If you want to dive further, we have some great videos on our YouTube channel, so please check them out. For Brian, the RU recommended some general lifestyle things, like supplements, and they gathered themselves for a round of IUI.
We started IUI. We were unsuccessful after a few rounds of that. And then, the main doctor, which was the doctor that was also focused on Jenny, said, look, I'm just going to be honest. We can keep trying IUI. I don't think it's going to work for you. I think IVF has a much better chance of success for you. So that's the route we want to go.
IVF with ICSI is a very good option and comes with the best success rates out there. But of course, there's a cost. Brian and Jenny had some coverage for fertility, but unfortunately, they found it incredibly opaque.
We couldn't get answers to anything that we needed answers to. We were both, reaching out to the HR departments in the companies we worked for, and then for our actual benefits provider, trying to understand what was covered or what wasn't covered, what this financial hit was going to look like for us. And there was one point I remember when we found out, because again, I'm like the researcher, we found out that because I was a veteran, the clinic we were using was offering a 20% discount to veterans if you paid in cash out of pocket versus getting covered through insurance. So Jenny's insurance had some coverage, but again, nobody could really tell us what that meant. It was kind of like, go out there and do it, get the bill, and then you'll find out what we're going to put towards it. And we were trying to ask what we thought was a pretty simple question, which is, can you just give us an estimate on what this is going to cost if we go through insurance? So we could look at what this is going to cost if we go out of pocket with a veteran's discount and see which is the cheapest for us and go down that path. And nobody could tell us what it was going to cost. The clinic could tell us what it was going to cost, but they nor the insurance company would tell us what was going to be covered and what the final bill might look like. So we couldn't really make a decision there, and we just decided for ease to just go out of pocket. And thinking back, it was lucky that we decided to start stockpiling the way that we did, because we were in a situation where we could write a check, although a hefty one, to do this and move to the next phase and start the journey through IVF.
That's a bit ridiculous, I think. Here's the hardworking couple. They're doing everything right. They're planners and preparers. He's a veteran. And neither HR nor their insurance carrier could give them even an estimate on what they might have to pay out of pocket for IVF. It's wild that people have to choose to pay out of pocket because it's just too unclear what something will cost them if they go through their coverage. It's a reminder of how different Progyny is. Fertility treatment is very complex, yet we keep our coverage very simple, so our members never have to guess. Of course, because Brian is such a planner, they had saved some money up for the possibility of needing IVF. So they were able to move ahead, choosing to go with cash and the veteran's discount rather than the mystery box that was their fertility coverage option. And they had a very successful egg retrieval, yielding multiple embryos, and then they prepared for an embryo transfer.
The first transfer was not good. The second transfer actually succeeded. And we were like, okay, there's a little bit of joy here, but still so much nervousness and apprehension and just trying to, not get too excited about it. And as we were planning to keep that one very, very quiet, we said, hey, we're going to wait to at least maybe 12, maybe even 20 weeks before we tell anybody, like not a soul, not our parents, like keeping this super low key. We had a visit from my in-laws. And they picked up on very quickly that Jenny wasn't having anything to drink, like no wine or anything. So they started asking questions. And we said, yeah, we have, some news to share, but we're not really ready to talk about it. So can we actually just change the subject? Let's please keep this quiet. Like, we don't know. We're still not out of the woodwork yet. And then we went back 2 weeks later for our next appointment and found out that, there was a miscarriage. And so that was devastating to deal with, after finally like a little bit of joy and hope and feeling that we were moving past the worst of it. That just happened at the worst time. And I think one of the things that we had always done throughout this process, whenever we were going for a doctor's appointment to find out even whether there was just a general success or a check-in, we were taking the rest of the day off work because we're like, just if it's bad news, we need to like recover. We don't need to like switch back on our work brains and go like right back into working. That day we had decided that we weren't going to do that. We were going back to work. We had said, you know what, enough of like suffering, enough of wondering about the negative things going to happen. We're going to be positive. This is going to be successful. Like, this is going to be amazing. And we went in, and then to get that news and then have to go back to work was just devastating. Jenny was fortunate. She went to work that day, within maybe even 30 minutes of being there. Her boss picked up that something wasn't right and pulled her aside and was like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but if you need to go home, go home. Just go. We'll worry about it tomorrow. So she was able to get home. I, on the other hand, was driving to a very important meeting like an hour away and then sitting in that meeting for a couple of hours and just thinking about this the entire time.
Together, they worked through this grief. And when they were ready, they moved ahead with their third embryo transfer.
Number 1 was a failure. Number 2 was the miscarriage. Number 3 was a success. And so our daughter Savannah was born about 3 years ago. And then number 4 was a success. So our daughter Paris was born a little under a year ago. And then we have 1 left. And we're deciding now, whether we want to go for what was the original goal, which was 3. Or if we want to, just stop at this point and we're happy with the size of our family.
None of this was what they had planned, but it was something that they did prepare for. And they reached their goal. Not once, but twice. But Brian's mission wasn't over. Having been through this and having experienced firsthand just how lacking support was in the end, he decided to speak. Brian became a speaker on a platform called Disrupt. Their Disrupt HR speaking events are an information exchange designed to energize, inform, and empower people in the HR field. And Brian is one heck of a speaker. In his talk, he goes into workplace culture, and he highlights the need for more support. His talk is called Work-Life Balance. Life is in all caps in the title. And we're posting a link to it in the description. We really implore you to check it out. It's just about 5 minutes long, and I know you'll enjoy it. About work-life balance, Brian sums it all up with the following quote. Perhaps if you focus more on supporting life, people will have more time to work.
If we're going to look at engaging a workforce, if we're going to look at employers' responsibility and part in the American dream being a reality, we have to look at all the ways that we can support, everything that happens outside of work. So, if 1 in 6 of your employees is dealing with infertility and you're ignoring it, you have a disengaged workforce, a large number of people that are disengaged at work. I think whether you make it across the board or you make it an optional coverage, just having it will help so many people. If we knew at that time, that we did not have coverage and there was an option to maybe spend a little bit more money on insurance so that we would have that in case we needed it versus needing to stockpile a bunch of money, it would have relieved a lot of anxiety for us. I think the reality is that most families can't afford IVF. So if you're going to do it, you either are going to do it because you're in an income bracket where you have the financial means to do it. You're going to do it because you're willing to go into considerable debt to do it. Or you're not going to do it because you just can't afford it and you can't imagine it. So that means that you're just not going to have a family.
Again, it's a 5-minute talk, and it's linked below in the description. So really, you should check it out. I also want to thank Drs. Bakare and Feinberg for sharing their expertise with us. And of course, I want to thank you. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to follow Progyny, you can do so at Progyny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on the podcast apps, please leave a rating and review. That's a huge deal for us. And if you're watching on YouTube, you gotta smash the like button. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.